The flashbulbs were blinding, popping like tiny lightning strikes against the velvet darkness of the New York night. At the top of the stairs, Richard Quinn stood with his hand on the waist of a woman who wasn't his wife, basking in the glow of $1 billion valuation. Tiffany laughed a sharp, brittle sound, pointing down at the woman in the shadows, a woman in a simple beige coat. "She looks like the help," Tiffany sneered loud enough for the reporters to hear. Richard smirked. He didn't know that in exactly 3 minutes, that woman would ascend those stairs, the beige would fall away, and he would realize he had just thrown away his entire empire for a cheap imitation. The Queen was about to take her throne. The air inside the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue always smelled like cold lilies and filtered money. It was an antiseptic scent, one that LaDonna Quinn had grown to loathe over the last 5 years. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at Central Park, which appeared as a dark, rectangular void in the glittering grid of Manhattan. She adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan. It was a soft, oatmeal-colored cashmere knitted by her grandmother in the Cotswolds. To the untrained eye, it looked old. To LaDonna, it was armor. "Are you honestly wearing that?" The voice sliced through the silence. Richard Quinn walked into the living room, adjusting the onyx cufflinks on his Tom Ford tuxedo. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way that Wall Street loved, jawline like a cliff edge, eyes like polished steel. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her clothes. "It's chilly, Richard. I'm just waiting for the car," LaDonna said, her voice quiet. She turned to face him. Underneath the cardigan, she was wearing a simple black slip dress. It wasn't flashy. It didn't scream for attention. It just was. Richard sighed a sound of exaggerated exhaustion. He walked over to the wet bar and poured himself a scotch neat. "Sarah, this is the Obsidian Gala. It's the biggest night of the year. The board is going to be there. The investors. Tiffany is going to be there." He said the name with a challenge, daring her to react. Tiffany Lacroix, the 23-year-old lifestyle consultant and Instagram model who had been shadowing Richard for the last 6 months. The press called her his muse. LaDonna called her the end of her marriage, though she hadn't said it out loud yet. "I know she is," LaDonna replied, her expression unreadable. "She's very excited. I saw her story." Richard paused, glass halfway to his mouth. "You watch her stories. It's hard to miss them when she tags me Richard." He rolled his eyes. "Look, Tiff is spirited. She understands the game. Image is everything. When I walk down that carpet, I need to look like the future. You." He gestured vaguely at her beige silhouette. "You look like the past. You look like a librarian who got lost on the way to a book club." "I thought you liked the library," LaDonna said softly. "That's where we met. Remember? You were crying over a failed stats exam." Richard's face hardened. He hated being reminded of the time before he was a billionaire. He hated remembering that it was LaDonna who tutored him. LaDonna who edited his business plan, and LaDonna who sold her mother's jewelry to fund his first server farm. "That was a long time ago," he snapped. "I've evolved. You haven't." He checked his Patek Philippe watch. "The limo is downstairs. I'm taking Tiffany in the first car. She needs the press exposure for her new swimwear line. You take the second car, and for God's sake, stay in the background. If a reporter asks you who you're wearing, just say, 'I don't know,' say you're sick." "I'm not sick, Richard." "You look it," he muttered, downing the rest of his drink. He walked past her, the smell of expensive cologne and arrogance trailing in his wake. He didn't kiss her goodbye. He didn't even look back. LaDonna waited until the elevator doors dinged shut. Then she walked over to the mirror in the hallway. She looked at the beige cardigan. It was fraying slightly at the cuff. She looked at her face, no makeup hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. She looked tired. But then a small ghost of a smile touched her lips. Richard thought image was everything. He thought money was loud. He thought power was a gold dress and a verified check mark. He had forgotten where LaDonna came from. He had forgotten that the loudest thunder comes after the quietest calm. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number saved simply as HV. "The package has been delivered to the suite at the plaza. I await your arrival, ma chérie. It is time to remind them what royalty looks like." LaDonna took off the beige cardigan and folded it neatly. She wouldn't be taking the second car. 2 hours earlier, the humiliation had already begun, though LaDonna hadn't been in the room to witness it. The scene was the VIP lounge of the Pierre Hotel, where the new money set was gathering for pre-gala drinks. The room was a kaleidoscope of sequins, spray tans, and desperate ambition. Waiters circulated with trays of caviar bumps and champagne that cost more than a Honda Civic. In the center of the room, holding court, was Tiffany Lacroix. She was undeniable. She was wearing a sheer, crystal-encrusted mesh dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. It was aggressive, flashy, and undoubtedly expensive, a custom piece by a trendy LA designer known for dressing pop stars. Her blonde hair was extensions, her lips were filled, and her laugh was practiced. She was holding her phone up, live streaming to her 4.5 million followers. "Hey guys, so we are literally moments away from the red carpet," she squealed, panning the camera around to show the A-list crowd. "Richard is over there talking business, being a boss, obviously." She zoomed in on Richard, who was laughing with a tech rival. He spotted the camera and gave a charming wink. "So," Tiffany continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "I have to tell you the funniest tea. So Richard's wife and I use that term loosely, because like are they even together, she's apparently coming tonight." She made a gagging face at the camera. The chat stream on the screen exploded with laughing emojis and hearts. "I saw what she was planning to wear," Tiffany whispered, her eyes widening with mock horror. "You guys, it's beige, like literal beige wool. She bought it at some thrift store in London or something." Richard was mortified. He was like, "Tiff, please help her." But like, you can't help someone who has zero taste, right? A group of sycophants around her laughed. One of them, a social climber named Jessica, leaned in. "She probably thinks she's being vintage." "No, she thinks she's being thrifty," Tiffany cackled. "Richard says she still clips coupons. Can you imagine being married to a billionaire and clipping coupons?" "It's embarrassing. It's disrespectful to his brand." Tiffany flipped her hair. "Anyway, Richard told me he's walking the carpet with me. We're the power couple. She's gonna sneak in the back entrance or something. Honestly, I'd feel bad for her if she wasn't so boring." She blew a kiss to the camera. "Stay tuned, babes. We're about to shut it down." She ended the stream and handed her phone to her assistant. Her smile instantly dropped into a sneer. "Did the video upload?" "Yes, Tiff. It's already got 50,000 views." "Good." She took a sip of champagne, her eyes scanning the room. She spotted Richard walking toward her. "Ready, babe?" Richard asked, sliding his arm around her waist. He felt the mesh of her dress. It felt expensive. It felt like success. "Born ready," she purred. "Is she coming?" Richard grimaced. "She's taking the second car. Don't worry about her. She knows her place." "Good," Tiffany said, checking her reflection in a nearby window. "Because tonight is about us, and I don't want a beige stain ruining my pictures." They walked out of the hotel, flashes popping as they entered the waiting Rolls-Royce. Richard felt like a king. He had the business, the money, and the hottest woman in New York on his arm. He had completely forgotten about the woman in the penthouse. He had forgotten that LaDonna wasn't just Richard Quinn's wife. Before she was LaDonna Quinn, she was LaDonna Caldwell. And the Caldwells didn't buy clothes. They owned the mills that made the fabric. They didn't chase trends. They funded the museums that housed the history of fashion, while Richard and Tiffany were drinking champagne and mocking her. LaDonna was in a taxi, heading not to the Gala, but to the service entrance of the Plaza Hotel. She wore a trench coat over her slip dress and sunglasses despite the darkness. The doorman, an older man named Arthur, who had worked there for 40 years, saw her approach. He didn't stop her. He didn't ask for ID. He straightened his back, tipped his cap, and opened the door. "Good evening, Miss Caldwell," he said, using her maiden name. "Mr. Vaundel is waiting in the royal suite." "Thank you, Arthur," she whispered. She stepped inside. The game was afoot, and Richard Quinn was playing checkers while his wife was playing 4D chess. The royal suite at the Plaza was a sprawling palace of gold leaf and velvet, but tonight it had been transformed into a fortress of fashion. Garment racks lined the walls laden with silks, tools, and brocades that cost more than most people's homes. Standing in the center of the room, examining a sketch with a jeweler's loupe, was Henry Vaundel. Henri was not just a designer. In the fashion world, he was God. He was the creative director of the House of Vaundel, a brand so exclusive they didn't advertise. They didn't have Instagram. They didn't dress influencers. To wear Vaundel was to tell the world you belonged to a tax bracket that didn't have a name yet. When LaDonna entered, dropping her trench coat on a chair, Henri looked up, his face lined with 60 years of artistic torment, and triumph broke into a genuine smile, something the press hadn't seen in a decade. "Ma petite lune," he whispered, crossing the room to kiss her on both cheeks. "You are late, and you are wearing." He pinched the sleeve of her oatmeal cardigan with 2 fingers, as if it were radioactive waste. "Wool. It is a tragedy." "It's comfortable, Henri," LaDonna said, hugging him back. She felt the tension in her shoulders finally begin to drop. "Richard hates it." "Then it is my favorite garment in history." Henri scoffed. He walked back to a covered mannequin in the center of the room. "That boy. He counts coins, but he does not know value. He thinks he bought a wife when he married you. He does not know he married the vault." Henri gestured to his assistants, 3 women dressed in severe black, moving like silent ninjas. They swarmed LaDonna, guiding her behind a silk screen. "You saw the live stream?" LaDonna asked from behind the screen as the slip dress was removed. "The whole world saw it," Henri called out, his voice sharp. "That little tart, Tiffany, she mocks the Caldwells. It is like a pigeon mocking a hawk. She wears a dress made of plastic and calls it fashion. Tonight, LaDonna, we do not just dress you, we weaponize you." "I don't want to make a scene, Henri. I just want," she paused, "I want him to see me, really see me, for the first time in years." "Oh, he will see you," Henri purred. He ripped the silk sheet off the mannequin. "And then he will weep." LaDonna stepped out from behind the screen in a silk robe. She looked at the mannequin, and her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a dress. It was architecture. It was a gown of vantablack velvet, a fabric so dark it absorbed 99.9% of light, making it look like a void in the universe. But struck through the darkness was a structured bodice of hammered platinum, molded to fit her torso like a second skin. The neckline plunged daringly yet remained elegant, framed by a collar of raw, uncut sapphires that had been in the Vaundel archives since the 1920s. The skirt was voluminous, a storm cloud of fabric that moved with a liquid grace. "This is," LaDonna whispered, reaching out but afraid to touch it. "The Midnight Revenge." Henri named it. I sketched it 5 years ago. I was waiting for the woman who could carry the weight of it. When you called me yesterday, I knew. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. The makeup artist, a legend flown in from Paris, didn't try to cover LaDonna's face with contour and heavy powder like Tiffany used. She amplified LaDonna's natural paleness, giving her a porcelain finish. Her lips were painted a deep blood-red oxblood. Her eyes were left relatively bare, save for a sharp, winged liner that made her look dangerous. Her hair, usually in a messy bun, was slicked back into a high architectural ponytail that cascaded down her back like a waterfall of dark silk. "Jewelry?" the assistant asked, opening a velvet case. "No necklaces," Henri commanded. "The collar of the dress is enough. We need the ears." He picked up a pair of earrings that made the assistants gasp. They were waterfall diamonds cascading down to her shoulders. But the center stones weren't white diamonds. They were rare red diamonds. LaDonna recognized them immediately. "Henri, these belong to my great-grandmother. Your mother left them with me for safekeeping before she passed," Henri said softly, fastening them onto her ears. She said, "Give them to Sarah when she stops being afraid of her own shadow." He turned her to the mirror. The woman in the reflection wasn't the quiet tutor who proofread business plans. She wasn't the wife who waited in the second car. She was a statue of vengeance. She looked tall, regal, and terrifyingly beautiful. "The car is downstairs," Henri said, handing her a clutch made of solid silver mesh. "Not the sedan Richard sent. I took the liberty of calling a friend." "Who?" "You'll see. Now go." Henri gently pushed her toward the door. "Go break his heart. And when the cameras flash, do not smile. Queens do not smile at peasants." The Obsidian Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the red carpet was a gauntlet of judgment. Hundreds of photographers lined the stairs, a wall of black lenses and shouting voices. "Richard, over here. Richard, Tiffany. Who are you wearing?" "Tiffany, blow a kiss." Richard Quinn soaked it up. He loved the noise. He loved the heat of the lights. He stood on the third step, posing with his hand firmly on Tiffany's lower back. Tiffany was working the cameras like a pro. She arched her back, stuck out her hip, and laughed at nothing. Her dress, the sheer crystal mesh, was doing its job. It was generating headlines. The Daily Mail had already tweeted Tiffany LaCour, "Bears, all in daring." Crystal gown, alongside tech mogul Richard Quinn. "They love us," Tiffany whispered through her teeth, keeping her smile plastered on. "We are literally the moment." "You look incredible, babe," Richard murmured, adjusting his tie. He glanced at the bottom of the stairs, looking for the second car. The black town car he had assigned to LaDonna was nowhere to be seen. Good, he thought. Maybe she decided to stay home. Maybe she realized she doesn't belong here. He felt a pang of relief. He didn't want to explain LaDonna to his investors. He didn't want to explain why his wife was wearing a cardigan to a black tie gala. He wanted tonight to be perfect. "Mr. Quinn, is it true you're looking to acquire Vaundel House?" a reporter from Forbes shouted. Richard smirked. "We are looking at many acquisitions. We like brands that define the future." Tiffany moved to the left. They took 2 more steps up. They were the center of the universe. And then the universe shifted. It started as a ripple at the bottom of the stairs. The photographers at the very end of the line stopped shouting. Then the ones next to them stopped. The silence spread like a contagion, moving up the stairs, wave by wave, until the entire red carpet fell into a confused, heavy hush. Richard frowned. What's going on? Why did they stop shooting? Tiffany looked annoyed. Maybe someone fell. Then a sound cut through the silence. It wasn't the hum of a modern engine. It was the deep, throaty growl of a vintage motor. A car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a town car. It wasn't a limo. It was a 1935 Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic. Only 4 were ever made. It was jet black, sleek as a panther, and worth roughly $40 million. Holy, a photographer whispered. Is that the Lauren car? The driver's door opened, and a man in a white chauffeur's uniform stepped out to open the passenger door. Richard squinted. Who had a Bugatti, the CEO of Amazon? A Saudi prince, a leg emerged from the car. A sharp black stiletto hit the red carpet. Then the woman rose. For a second, nobody moved. The woman was a vision of darkness. The vantablack velvet of her dress seemed to absorb the flashbulbs that were starting to pop tentatively. The platinum bodice gleamed like armor. The red diamond earrings caught the light and threw blood-colored sparks into the air. She stood at the base of the stairs looking up. She looked at the sea of photographers. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just adjusted her silver clutch and took the first step. Who is that? Tiffany asked, her voice shrill in the sudden quiet. Is that a model? Who is she? Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His knees locked. The glass of scotch he'd had earlier threatened to come back up. He knew that walk. He knew the tilt of that chin. No, he whispered. It can't be. The photographers woke up. Click, 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 click. The sound was deafening. It was 10 times louder than the reaction for Tiffany. Look right, look right. Ma'am, over here. The dress, who is the dress? A veteran photographer from Vogue, a woman who never shouted, lowered her camera and gasped. That's a Vaundel custom. And those earrings, those are the Caldwell red diamonds. She screamed out, LaDonna Quinn! The name ripped through the crowd. LaDonna Quinn. The wife. The beige wife. Tiffany's jaw dropped. She looked down at the woman ascending the stairs. The boring woman she had mocked on Instagram 2 hours ago was now walking toward them like an executioner in couture. LaDonna moved slowly. Every step was a statement. The heavy velvet skirt swayed with a hypnotic rhythm. She looked up and locked eyes with Richard. Her expression was terrifyingly blank. There was no love. There was no anger. There was just the cold, hard realization that she was the most powerful person in the zip code. She reached the spot where Richard and Tiffany were standing. Tiffany, in her naked dress, suddenly looked cheap. She looked like costume jewelry next to the Hope diamond. Richard couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed. Sarah, he choked out. You look... LaDonna stopped. She didn't look at Tiffany. She looked only at Richard. Hello, Richard, she said. Her voice was low, smooth, and carried perfectly to the nearby microphones. You said, the beige cardigan. Richard stammered, his brain misfiring. I thought "Oh, the cardigan," LaDonna said, a small, icy smile touching her lips. "I left it at home. It didn't seem appropriate for the future." She turned to the reporters, who were practically climbing over each other to get a shot of her. "Mrs. Quinn. Mrs. Quinn, is that Henry Vaundel?" a reporter screamed. LaDonna turned her head slightly, giving them the perfect profile shot of the earrings. "It is," she said calmly. "Henri sends his regards. He prefers to dress women, not content creators." The shade was subtle, but it hit Tiffany like a brick. The crowd gasped. Tiffany flushed a deep, blotchy red. "Excuse me," she snapped, stepping forward, trying to reclaim the spotlight. "I'm sure Henry loves my look. It's trending." LaDonna finally looked at Tiffany. She looked her up and down, a slow, agonizing appraisal that lasted 5 seconds. "Trends fade, Tiffany." LaDonna said, her voice bored. "Class is permanent. You might want to cover up. You're shivering." She turned back to the stairs and continued her ascent, leaving Richard and Tiffany frozen in her wake. "Richard!" a photographer yelled. "Are you coming with your wife?" Richard looked at Tiffany, who was fuming, her face twisted in ugly anger. Then he looked at LaDonna, who was ascending the stairs like a queen, returning to her court. He instinctively took a step toward LaDonna. "Richard!" Tiffany hissed, grabbing his arm. "Don't you dare leave me here!" Richard shook her off. The spell of the muse was broken. He was a businessman, and he knew he had just undervalued his biggest asset. "LaDonna, wait!" he called out, hurrying up the stairs after her, leaving Tiffany alone on the red carpet as the cameras turned their backs on her to follow the woman in black. But LaDonna didn't wait. She didn't slow down. The gap between them was only 10 feet, but it felt like 1,000 miles. The interior of the Metropolitan Museum was a cathedral of hushed whispers and clinking crystal. The great hall had been transformed into a dining space fit for Olympus, with tables draped in silver linens and centerpieces of white orchids that towered toward the ceiling. When LaDonna walked in, the room didn't just go quiet, it reorganized itself. It was a phenomenon known in high society as the gravity of old money. Influencers and tech bros chased attention, but the true titans, the oil heirs, the shipping magnates, the owners of banks gravitated toward their own, and LaDonna Caldwell was their own. She hadn't taken 3 steps into the hall before Charles Abernathy, the chairman of the Global Chase Bank and the man who held the mortgage on Richard's company headquarters, stood up from his table. Charles was 80 years old, a man who allegedly hadn't smiled since the market crash of 1987. But he beamed at LaDonna. "LaDonna!" Charles boomed, ignoring a supermodel who was mid-sentence. He walked over, leaning on his cane. "My dear, I haven't seen you since your father's funeral. You look strictly Vaundel." "Uncle Charles." LaDonna smiled, accepting his hand. "It's been too long. I've been occupied." "Occupied with that husband of yours, I suppose," Charles grunted, casting a disparaging look toward the entrance, where Richard was currently arguing with security about Tiffany's seating assignment. Richard finally broke away and rushed toward them, breathless and sweating slightly under the lights. He saw the most powerful banker in New York holding his wife's hand. Panic and opportunity warred in his eyes. He needed Charles to approve a bridge loan by Monday, or Quinn Tech would miss payroll. "Charles!" Richard exclaimed, putting on his best salesman smile. He slid next to LaDonna, placing a possessive hand on her bare shoulder. The velvet felt cold. Her skin felt colder. "I see you've found my better half. We were just..." I was talking to LaDonna, Richard, Charles interrupted, his voice dropping 10 degrees. We were discussing the Caldwell Trust. Richard's smile faltered. The trust? Oh, right. Sarah's little inheritance. LaDonna turned her head slowly to look at her husband. Her eyes were dark pools of amusement. It's not so little anymore, Richard. Markets have been kind. Actually, Charles said, looking sharply at Richard, we were discussing the trust's portfolio. LaDonna has been making some very aggressive moves lately. Very smart moves. She's reacquired the controlling stake in the North Atlantic shipping lines. Richard froze. What, Sarah, you bought a shipping line. I bought 3, she corrected softly. Logistics is the future, Richard. You're always talking about the cloud, but things still need to move on the water. Richard felt a disconnect in his brain. The woman who clipped coupons for Greek yogurt had just bought a fleet of cargo ships. Just then the sound of heels clacking aggressively against the marble floor announced Tiffany's arrival. She had bypassed the security check and was storming toward them, a glass of pink champagne in her hand. She looked out of place like a neon sign in a library. Richard, she whined loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. They put us at table 40. That's by the kitchen. I can't be by the kitchen, the lighting is tragic. She stopped when she saw the group. She looked at Charles Abernathy. Looked at his tuxedo, which was expensive, but dated, and dismissed him as a nobody. Richard, tell this old guy to move so I can stand there, Tiffany said, gesturing with her glass. The silence that followed was so thick you could choke on it. Charles Abernathy looked at Tiffany as if she were a bug on his windshield. I beg your pardon, Tiffany, Richard hissed, grabbing her arm hard. Shut up. This is Charles Abernathy. I don't care if he's Charlie Brown, Tiffany snapped, pulling her arm away. My feet hurt, and your wife is standing in my spotlight. LaDonna laughed. It was a soft, musical sound that terrified Richard more than her silence. I think, Richard, LaDonna said, gently removing Richard's hand from her shoulder, that you should go sit at table 40. The lighting might not be flattering, but it's where you belong tonight. Sarah, don't be like this. Richard pleaded, his voice cracking. I need to talk to Charles. The loan is denied, Richard, Charles said flatly. Richard turned pale. What, you can't? We have a meeting on Tuesday. I cancelled it, Charles said, looking at LaDonna. I don't do business with men who bring trinkets to the Obsidian Gala while their wives stand in the cold. It shows a lack of judgment. And a lack of judgment in life usually means a lack of judgment in business. But go enjoy your dinner, Richard, LaDonna said, turning her back on him. I believe they're serving chicken. You like chicken? She took Charles's arm. Shall we, Uncle Charles? I believe I'm seated at the host's table. Richard stood frozen as his wife walked away arm in arm with the man who held his financial destiny. He was left standing with Tiffany, who was busy taking a selfie with the floral arrangement. Ugh, finally, Tiffany muttered. She's so rude. Come on, babe. Let's go make fun of people at the bad tables. Richard looked at Tiffany. For the first time, he didn't see a muse. He saw an anchor, and he was sinking. Dinner was an agonizing affair for Richard Quinn. Table 40 was indeed by the kitchen swing doors. Every time a waiter burst out with a tray of filet mignon, a draft of hot onion-scented air hit Richard in the face. His dinner companions were the third cousins of minor celebrities and a frantic publicist who kept trying to pitch him a cryptocurrency for pets. From his exile, Richard watched the head table. It was raised on a dais bathed in golden light. LaDonna sat between Charles Abernathy and the mayor of New York. She was laughing a genuine, radiant laugh he hadn't heard in years. She was drinking vintage Burgundy. Men were leaning in to listen to her speak. She wasn't just attending the gala, she was holding court. "Stop staring at her," Tiffany snapped, stabbing a cherry tomato. "It's weird. She looks like a witch in that dress anyway." "She looks like a billionaire," Richard muttered, taking a heavy swig of his drink. "And I look like an idiot." "You look like a boss," Tiffany insisted, checking her phone. "Look, the comments on my live are going crazy. Everyone is asking why." "She's here. I told them she gate-crashed." "She didn't gate-crash, Tiffany. She's a Caldwell. She probably paid for the damn roof we're sitting under," Richard snapped. He was starting to sober up, and the reality of his situation was crashing down on him. The lights dimmed. The auctioneer, a British man with a voice like velvet, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the charity auction. All proceeds tonight go to the Arts Foundation." Richard loosened his tie. He needed a win. He needed to show the room that he was still a player. If he couldn't get the loan, he had to project strength. "Item number 1, the auctioneer announced. "A week on the private island of Mustique." Bidding started. Richard sat on his hands. Too small. "Item number 5, the auctioneer eventually called out. "This is a special lot. A vintage 1962 Rolex Daytona Paul Newman edition, donated by an anonymous collector." The room murmured. This was $1 million watch, a status symbol. "Starting bid at 200,000. 300, a voice shouted. 400, Richard's hand shot up. 500,000. He felt a rush of adrenaline. People turned to look at him. "Yes, look at me. I have money. I am Richard Quinn." 600,000, a voice called from the front. It was a tech rival, Marcus Dean. Richard grit his teeth. 700,000, 800, Marcus counted casually. Richard was sweating. He didn't actually have 800,000 in liquid cash right now. He'd have to pull it from the company emergency fund. But he couldn't lose. Not tonight. $1 million, Richard screamed, standing up. The room gasped. Tiffany clapped excitedly. "Yes, baby, buy it." $1 million to Mr. Quinn at the back, the auctioneer said. "Do I hear 1.1? Silence." Richard smirked. He adjusted his jacket. He had won. 1.4 million. The voice was calm, melodic, and amplified by a microphone. It came from the head table. Richard's blood ran cold. He looked up. LaDonna was holding her paddle up, not even looking at him. She was sipping her water. 1.5 million from Mrs. Quinn, the auctioneer said, looking delighted. The room buzzed. Husband versus wife. Was it a game, or was it war? Richard's ego screamed. He couldn't let her beat him. She was wearing a cardigan 2 hours ago. She was the thrifty one. 1.6. Richard shouted, his voice shaking. 2 million, LaDonna countered instantly. 2.2, Richard yelled. He was dizzy. That was the entire payroll for next month. 3 million, LaDonna said. She turned around in her chair, looking directly at him across the vast hall. She raised her glass in a mock toast. The room went deadly silent. $3 million for a watch. It was absurd. It was aggressive. It was a public castration. Richard stood there, his mouth dry. He couldn't go higher. If he did, the board would fire him for embezzlement. He physically could not bid. Going once, the auctioneer chanted. Going twice. Sold to Mrs. LaDonna Quinn for $3 million. Applause thundered. LaDonna didn't smile. She just nodded. Richard sank back into his chair, defeated. Tiffany looked furious. Why did you let her win? That watch would have looked so good on you. Shut up, Tiffany, Richard whispered, head in his hands. But the torture wasn't over. The auctioneer cleared his throat. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a surprise addition to the program. We have a late entry for the auction blocks, but this isn't for charity. This is a private equity sale that has been authorized to take place tonight live. Murmurs of confusion filled the room. This was highly unusual. Up for auction, the auctioneer announced, is the controlling block of shares 51% of a technology firm known as Quinn Technologies. Richard's head snapped up so fast he nearly got whiplash. What? The seller, the auctioneer continued, is the distressed debt holder reacting to a breach of loan covenants triggered at 8:00 p.m. tonight. Richard scrambled for his phone. He dialed his CFO. Bob, what is happening? Richard. The CFO sounded like he was crying. The bank called the loan. They said our liquidity ratio dropped. They triggered the collateral clause. They're selling the company, Richard. It's gone. Who called the loan? Richard screamed. Who owns the debt? On stage, the auctioneer answered the question for him. The debt was acquired 2 days ago by a private holding company called Caldwell Ventures. Richard dropped the phone. He looked at the head table. LaDonna was standing up. She wasn't bidding. She was the seller. She had bought his debt. She had waited until he was at the gala, distracted and spending money he didn't have. She had triggered the default. And now she was selling his life's work to the highest bidder in front of everyone he wanted to impress. Bidding starts at 50 million, the auctioneer said. 60, shouted Marcus Dean, Richard's rival. 70, shouted another CEO. They were picking the carcass of his company clean right in front of him. Richard jumped up, knocking his chair over. He ran toward the stage, pushing past waiters. Stop this. You can't do this. He reached the dais, breathless, his tuxedo disheveled. He looked up at LaDonna. Sarah, please, he begged, tears actually pricking his eyes. This is my company. I built this. You helped me build this. LaDonna looked down at him from the stage. She looked like a goddess of judgment. I did help you build it, Richard, she said, her voice amplified by the microphone the auctioneer held out to her. I built the foundation. I paid the bills. I stayed in the shadows so you could shine. And how did you repay me? She gestured to the back of the room, where Tiffany was trying to sneak out a side door. You treated me like an accessory that had gone out of style, LaDonna said coldly. Well, Richard, fashion changes, and so does ownership. She turned to Marcus Dean. Mr. Dean, I believe I heard 80 million. Done, Marcus shouted. Sold, LaDonna said, slamming the gavel down herself. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Richard fell to his knees. The cameras were flashing blindingly now, capturing every second of his ruin. He was a billionaire when he walked up the stairs. He was unemployed before dessert was served. LaDonna smoothed her velvet skirt. She looked at Richard one last time. I'll have the divorce papers sent to your mother's house, she whispered, leaning down. Since you no longer have the penthouse, that's in my name, too. The silence outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art was heavier than the noise had ever been. Only 20 minutes ago, the air had been vibrating with the screams of photographers and the popping of flashbulbs, a chaotic symphony worshipping Richard Quinn. Now the red carpet was being rolled up by tired workers in high-visibility vests. The barricades were being dismantled. The magic was over, and the grim reality of a wet New York Tuesday was settling in. Richard stood on the edge of the curb, the damp cold of the stone seeping through the soles of his dress shoes. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo jacket. In his frantic sprint to the stage to stop the auction, he had left it draped over his chair, a chair that was now likely being stacked away, along with his dignity. He shivered, wrapping his arms around his chest. The adrenaline that had fueled his panic was gone, replaced by a nausea that roiled in his gut. He looked down at his phone. No service. His company phone had been remotely bricked. The digital umbilical cord to his empire had been severed. A sleek black car idled near the corner, its tail-lights painting red streaks on the wet asphalt. It was the Rolls-Royce. Hope, desperate and pathetic, clawed its way up Richard's throat. Tiffany. She was still there. She was his partner, his muse. She had told him 1,000 times that they were a power couple, that they were building a brand together that transcended traditional business. Surely she would understand. Surely she would help him strategize a comeback. He ran towards the car, his footsteps splashing loudly in the puddles. Tiffany, wait. He reached the car just as the window rolled up, but he managed to grab the handle. The door was locked. He tapped frantically on the glass. Inside, Tiffany Lacroix sat bathed in the cool blue light of her smartphone. She didn't look up immediately. She was furiously typing, her long, manicured thumbs flying across the screen. When she finally turned her head, her expression wasn't one of concern or love. It was the look one gives a waiter who has brought the wrong order, mild annoyance mixed with dismissal. She signaled the driver to lower the window 2 inches, just enough for her voice to carry, but not enough for him to reach in. Tiffany. Richard gasped, wiping rain from his forehead. Thank God. Let me in. It's a mess. LaDonna. She blindsided me. It's a hostile takeover, but I can fight it. I just need to get to the lawyers. We need to go to the Hamptons house and regroup. Tiffany laughed. It wasn't her practiced, bubbly influencer laugh. It was a dry, brittle sound. The Hamptons house, she repeated, looking at him over the rim of her sunglasses. Richard, are you not checking Twitter? #BrokeBillionaire is trending #1 worldwide. Legal Twitter is already explaining that because of the cross-collateralization clauses you lost everything, including the Hamptons house. It's a setback, Richard pleaded, his voice cracking. I'm Richard Quinn. I can build it again. But I need you. We're a team. You said I was your king. And you were, Tiffany said, her voice devoid of emotion. But a king without a kingdom is just a guy in a wet shirt. She turned her phone screen toward him. It showed her Instagram profile. Look at my follower count, Richard. It's dropping. People are unsubscribing because they think I'm dating a loser. I can't have that energy. My brand is about success. It's about luxury. It's not about whatever this is. I left my wife for you. Richard whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. I threw away 15 years for you. Tiffany sighed, checking her reflection in the rear-view mirror. And honestly, that was poor judgment on your part. LaDonna is terrifying. You should have stuck with her. She's currently doing an exclusive interview with Vanity Fair inside. I'm trying to get in there to see if she needs a new brand ambassador. Richard recoiled as if she had slapped him. You're going to ask her for a job. A girl's gotta eat, Richie, and right now she's the one holding the menu. Tiffany tapped the partition. Driver, go, and lock the doors. Tiffany. No, I don't have a ride. The window slid up, sealing her away in her bubble of leather and privilege. The Rolls-Royce pulled away the tires, hissing on the wet road, leaving Richard Quinn alone on the corner of Fifth Avenue, soaked to the bone, and worth exactly nothing. The humiliation was a slow, agonizing descent. Richard walked 40 blocks to 432 Park Avenue. By the time he arrived, his feet were blistered and his shirt was translucent with rain. He marched into the lobby, ready to scream, ready to demand entry to his sanctuary. But the lobby was quiet. The night concierge was a man named Elias, a man Richard had walked past every day for 5 years, without ever making eye contact. Richard strode toward the elevators. "I lost my key," he barked. "Buzz me up." Elias didn't move. He stood behind the marble desk, his face impassive. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Quinn." "Do you know who I am?" Richard shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I own the penthouse." "The deed to the penthouse was transferred to the Caldwell Trust at 9:00 p.m. tonight," Elias said calmly. "We received the paperwork via courier. You are no longer a resident." "That's illegal." That's theft." "It is a foreclosure, sir," Elias corrected. He reached under the desk and produced a small, soggy cardboard box. "Miss Caldwell." "Excuse me." "Mrs. Quinn left instructions. She said if you arrived, I was to give you this. She called it a care package." Richard stared at the box. His hands shook as he took it. Inside there were no keys to a Porsche. There was no checkbook. There was his electric toothbrush, 2 changes of underwear, a bottle of drugstore aspirin, and a framed photograph. He picked up the photo. It was from their honeymoon in limited-budget Italy 15 years ago. They were eating gelato on a curb, laughing. LaDonna looked young and adoring. Richard looked happy, truly happy in a way he hadn't looked in a decade. The glass of the frame was cracked down the center, splitting his face from hers. "She also left a message," Elias added. Richard looked up, eyes red. "What?" She said, "Tell him the view from the top is beautiful, but it's very cold when you're alone." Richard turned and walked out of the building. He didn't have the energy to argue. He checked into a Motel 6 in Queens, paying with the last $300 of cash he had in his wallet, the only money the banks hadn't frozen yet. He sat on the lumpy mattress, smelling of stale cigarettes and lemon polish, and turned on the television. Every channel was the same. CNN, the Quinn collapse. How LaDonna Caldwell reclaimed her family legacy. Fox Business. The $3 billion divorce. Why smart money is betting on the ex-wife. On the screen, footage from the gala played on a loop. There was LaDonna standing on the podium, looking like a dark angel in her Vanta-black gown. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't gloating. She was calm. Mr. Quinn was a visionary. LaDonna told the reporters, her voice gracious. But vision without foundation is a hallucination. I am simply restoring the foundation. She hadn't just defeated him. She had erased his relevance. She had framed his destruction as a necessary corporate correction. Richard turned off the TV, curled into a ball on the cheap bedspread, and for the first time since he was a child, he wept. 6 months later, the autumn wind whipped down Madison Avenue, stripping the last of the golden leaves from the trees. Richard adjusted his collar against the chill. His suit was grey polyester blend, bought off the rack at a department store sale. It fit poorly around the shoulders. He carried a briefcase that contained not merger documents, but spreadsheets for a mid-sized logistics firm where he now worked as a compliance officer. It was a job. It paid the rent on his studio apartment in New Jersey. It kept him fed. But it was a grey existence, devoid of colour, devoid of thrill. He ducked into a small upscale coffee shop to escape the wind. He ordered a black coffee, the cheapest item on the menu, and sat at a small table in the back, opening his laptop. The bell above the door chimed. A hush seemed to fall over the front of the shop. It wasn't the terrified silence of the Gala. It was a warm, respectful quiet. Richard looked up. She stood by the counter reviewing a menu. LaDonna. She looked breathtaking. Not in the sharp, dangerous way she had at the Gala. She looked soft. She looked at peace. Her hair was loose, falling in gentle waves around her face. She wore no makeup, yet her skin glowed with health. And she was wearing the cardigan, the oatmeal-coloured hand-knitted cashmere cardigan, the one he had mocked, the one he had called librarian clothes, the one he had forbidden her to wear. She wore it over a simple white blouse and jeans. She looked like a billionaire, not because of what she wore, but because she looked like she didn't have a care in the world. Standing next to her was a man. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and a scarf draped effortlessly around his neck. It was Henri Vondel. He was holding her hand, not possessively, but with a gentle, anchoring touch. He whispered something in her ear, and LaDonna threw her head back and laughed, a genuine, loud, joyous sound that Richard realized with a pang of agony he hadn't heard in 5 years. Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew he should stay hidden. He knew he should look down at his spreadsheets. But the pull was too strong. He needed her to see him. He needed to know if he still mattered, even as a memory. He stood up and walked toward the counter. Sarah. The laughter stopped. LaDonna turned. Her eyes widened slightly. But there was no fear, no anger, just a mild surprise, as if she had run into an old acquaintance she couldn't quite place. "Richard," she said. Her voice was warm but distant. "Hello." Richard fumbled for words. He felt painfully aware of his cheap suit, his scuffed shoes, the grey circles under his eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I like the coffee," she said simply. "And Henri has a studio nearby." Henri nodded politely at Richard, a look of pity in his eyes. "Mr. Quinn, you look happy," Richard managed to say. "I am," LaDonna replied. "I'm very happy." "I miss you, Sarah," Richard blurted out. The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and pathetic. The entire coffee shop seemed to lean in. "I know I messed up. I know I was blinded by the money. But I remember the library. I remember when we had nothing but Chinese takeout and big dreams. I miss us." He looked at the cardigan. He reached out a hand, almost touching the wool, but stopped himself. "You're wearing it," he whispered. "The cardigan. You kept it. That has to mean something, right? It means you remember." LaDonna looked down at the sweater. She brushed a piece of lint from the sleeve with a tender motion. "I do remember, Richard," she said softly. "I remember that I knitted this for myself when we couldn't afford heat in our first apartment. I remember that it kept me warm when you were working late. And I remember that it was the only thing that hugged me when you stopped." She looked up, meeting his eyes with a clarity that shattered him. "I'm not wearing it for you. I'm not wearing it for the past. I'm wearing it because it's real. It's authentic. And after years of living in a plastic world, I finally learned the value of real things." She took Henri's arm. "We have to go, Richard. I have a board meeting and Henri has a fitting." "Sarah, wait," Richard pleaded, stepping forward. Can we get coffee sometime? Just to talk. I'm changing. I'm learning." LaDonna paused at the door. She looked back at him standing there in his ill-fitting suit, surrounded by the smell of roasted beans and rain. "I'm glad you're learning, Richard," she said, and her voice was final. "But some tuitions are very expensive, and you've already paid yours. Goodbye." The door opened, letting in a gust of cold wind and the noise of the city. LaDonna and Henri stepped out, opening a large umbrella together. They walked away into the grey afternoon, a bubble of warmth and light moving through the gloom. Richard stood frozen in the center of the coffee shop. He watched them until they were just a blur in the distance. He looked down at his own hands. They were empty. He walked back to his table, sat down, and stared at his cold black coffee. He had chased the glitter, and he had found it. But in the process, he had thrown away the gold. Richard Quinn spent the rest of his life chasing the high he had felt on those stairs. But he never found it again. He remained a former millionaire, a cautionary tale whispered about at parties he was no longer invited to. LaDonna Caldwell went on to launch her own venture capital firm, funding female-led startups. She married Henry Vondel a year later in a private ceremony in the Cotswolds. She wore beige, and it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever seen. The story of the Quinn Gala serves as a brutal reminder to the high society of New York. You can buy the clothes, you can buy the press, and you can buy the image. But you cannot buy class. And you should never ever underestimate the woman who knows exactly what she is worth, with or without the cameras flashing. Wow. Talk about a reality check. Richard thought he was the king of the world. But he forgot that a king is nothing without his queen, especially when the queen holds the mortgage. And if you enjoyed this story of karma betrayal and high-fashion revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We upload brand new drama every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on your way up. You might meet them on your way down. See you in the next video. 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 In the next video.
And there's people having lectures. Flower arranging. My mum used to pick flowers every day from the garden, cut flowers, put them in vase. Fuck me. Oh, sorry, Jack, can't afford your tennis racket. We've got to spend all the money on a ramp and a motorised wheelchair for this money-grabbing little fucking... Why do you need a motorised one? No arms. That's fair enough. That is fair enough. I can tell some of you feel a bit uncomfortable laughing at little Timmy, who's a little 6-year-old lad. He's got a funny little voice because his chest is all fucked. Got no arms, no legs, just like stumps, right? But let me tell you something about Timmy to make you feel better about yourselves. He's a fucking racist. Yes. Horrible little shit, he is. You little fucking bigot. You disgusting little fucking racist, you racist scum, you filthy little fucking, you fascist, you fucking, you disgust me. Homophobic? Yeah. He's like, they're not like us. Nothing's like you disgusting little fucking, you prejudiced little piece of, you ball of hate. You disgusting little fucking racist homophobe. I wish we'd had a scan. You absolute, misogynist. If he could, he'd rape. There's your little Timmy.